Welcome, YouTube, to Sunaru Gaming. Today's talk with Graham Pike, creator of Nerd
Oh,
Magazine. Hi, Graham. Is what makes 2D special, and just a general talk around 2D games.
can't beat them.
Can't beat them. We've talked quite a lot about 2D games in the past, so I thought instead of asking you something like what's the first 2D game you've ever played, because we've kind of covered that already,
Yeah, I'm sure we have, yeah.
is
Because
to
all the early games were 2D, obviously.
what makes 2D games stand out for you in a world where 3D open world games seem to be the norm?
It's hard to say. I have given that a little bit of thought, obviously. I think what it is in a 2D game, whether it be one from the 80s, 90s up till 2020, is I think 2D game has to work within the limits of what it is. It's a 2D game. It's not trying to recreate a real world. It's giving you like a version of a world, whether that's just a single screen game
Mm.
or it's a game that hasn't like some, say for instance, platform games that can cover vast areas, but it's still only one. But it's all very limited. I think it's those limitations that makes the game more interesting. I don't feel less involved if I'm seeing a smallish character running along a sort of platform and then either climbing or floating or jetpacking up to the next level or moving around like that than I do going into the screen. And I think gameplay wise, I think it's those limitations and overcoming them and therefore having to be very inventive. I think it makes the games more interesting. And I think the trouble with a lot of 3D games, they're so busy trying to recreate a world or make it seem like it's endless, like make it seem like there's totally free wandering, there's totally limitless places you can go. That isn't true anyway. And they're so busy making you think, trying to think that they sometimes forget about the gameplay. And I know, as we've discussed, even with 2D games, you want to see more of the world, but seeing more of the world should be secondary to the actual gameplay. Well, I think a lot of 3D games, I don't know, I think they're almost too open. They're too busy trying to be a world or whatever. And but I'm not saying that the early 3D games were limited, think because they just couldn't move around much, like in Space Harrier or But I think the early 2D games would just failed because not failed, but they weren't so appealing because they couldn't seem to handle the limitations were more obvious because they're trying to recreate a sort of reality, whether it be Nazi Germany or 25th century America. It's still trying to recreate in a real way. Whereas the 2D world, you immediately know that it's a game and it's a game world. Whereas the other ones are trying to make you think you're in a movie or something. I'm not saying that can't be fun, and of course, I'm not trying to say 3D games aren't great. Some of them are great, obviously. I've enjoyed lots of them myself, but I think with a 2D game, you've got this thing that immediately says this is a game world, and you've got to suspend disbelief straight away. Not consciously, obviously. What you might do, but mostly you just. Whereas I think with 3D, it's trying to make you in a real world. It's like you're trying to sort of feel like you're there, like what I mean, which is a good thing. But I think sometimes and quite often the gameplay loses its immediacy, and it becomes more of a I can see what's this world like. But then soon, like, I can't go in there. Oh dear, the door's locked, or something like. And some 3D worlds, you just walk up to a place and you can't walk any further. There's a street, but you can't. But that's a limitation of that particular game or whatever. But no, I'm not saying 2D is better than 3D, but I think that's why it's special because immediately it's a game, and the programmers know that they've got to make up for the fact that it's not trying to be real by being inventive, clever in its style, the way and the game mechanics and the inventiveness of those games mechanics. So I think that's why it's quite appealing. And also 3D worlds, they tend to be games that you have to play for a longish time. I'm not saying there aren't some 3D games you can have a blast for 20 minutes and then put it down. I'm sure there are, but I think in most 3D worlds, you're expected to be there for a few hours probably. And I think it's easier with a 2D game, whether it's a simple thing like columns or a 2D role-playing game. That's probably one of the few types that you would have to be on for longer. But mostly, I think it's easy to make a 2D game immediate, and yes, you can really enjoy it for half an hour and put it down. Whereas with majority of 3D games, I think they want you in general to play a lot longer. But
Yeah.
that's not always the case. I mean, you get racing, I suppose, an arcade racing game is 3D, and that you can have a really good last on that for half an hour and put it down. So it's not a fixed rule. I just think in general, that's how it feels to me.
Yeah, I mean,
And
there are a lot of 3Ds where, I mean, a lot of those first-person shooters that have come out are deliberately not so big. They're deliberately small and short periods of time. I mean, that evolves off into a different conversation about multiplayer online games, which we're not getting into. But I think when we've seen the resurgence of 2D games, not just with sort of Streets of Rage 4, but with those of indie titles as well that have sort of become really big cult things,
yeah,
is
I went.
they grasp, partly because they can be shorter, but there is something about them
Yes,
that just stands out completely differently. Like you're saying, it's not trying to fool you or saying, here's this beautiful, like Death Stranding, here's these beautiful mountains or anything
yeah,
like that. It's saying, this is, you're here, you know what you're doing, here's what you've got to do, and now here's a challenge.
yeah, yeah. That's pretty much sums it up. I think. Well, when you think, what's probably the most, well, not now, but last year or two, what's the most popular game amongst the general public? Games like Candy Crush. What's that? A 2D game, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, I've not played. I've seen people playing it on mobile, so I'm guessing it's a bit like a columns type of game, but joining things up. But I think obviously there's a bit of nostalgia as well. But I honestly think as a game playing element, it's good. You know, we're used to board games. We're used to this sort of.
Yeah.
Well, when you think everything's actually only 2D, it's just pretended to be 3D.
Yeah,
A film is only 2D. You just start to see it as a 3D thing. But you know, it's so I talk about limitations. For a little while, I got into role playing games, and I often found that the old 2D ones, it was just because it was 2D. They started to develop like the graphical style of, especially Japanese ones. They just use really magical little lighting techniques and bits of detail, and just sort of like lovely sort of ways of enhancing the backgrounds and the characters. And it was like working within that limitation, which made it something a bit special. I'm not saying, I've enjoyed some 3D wander around games, and they're great as well. But sometimes I just think I don't want to wander off into the wild, and then once in a while I might come across a wolf or something. I'd rather let's have a game where things are laid out as a game, not as a real world with a few things in it. But some people love that. They want to spend hours, and I have spent hours playing 2D games. As you know, some of those old 2D like Neo Geo games are so hard you have to just keep going and keep going because you're determined to see the next level. So I'm not saying that none of this is a hard and fast ruling. It's just how I perceive it. But yeah, I think it's the limitations often lead to better things. It's a bit like music, really. If somebody's got a choice of any palette of sound and any palette of instrument, sometimes you get lost in it. Other people have just got like a guitar and a drum and a couple of other bits, and there's no special effects, there's nothing. It's just a little band, and they have to be dead inventive,
Yeah.
And if they're musical, clever, it's a bit like that. I think with these programmers, I think that they had to be inventive when there was only really 2D to do. Or pretend 3D.
Definitely.
I just think Space Harrier is probably the first 3D game I could think of seeing, but it was like an on rails sort of 3D, wasn't it? But it had that first person type of, or third person just behind the person perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm not on a 3D bashing mode. I just think that we're discussing 2D, and I think in a way they've got something special about them, caused by the limitations, caused by the fact that people, I suppose they've had longer to think about. But they really have to think, well, how can I, not only can I make this interesting and varied, but how can I make it look good? How can I make people think, God, I really want to see that bit? Or look at that, look at little 2D, like you come at the platform game, there's this massive, impressive boss doing something really weird with something unusual. And you're thinking, because you're so used to seeing little characters. It's just the whole thing. I mean, I can remember just having big sprites was impressive, back in the 16-bit days. Most games couldn't even have the memory or the ability to run big sprites at any sort of. And then it's something. Oh, look at that! Yeah, and not only was it good, but it moved well. It didn't just like across the screen. It was like it it morphed and it, you know, and it could, you know,
Struck a
move.
good balance between visuals, mechanics,
Yeah,
and feel.
definitely. But I say all that can be done in 3D, but it's harder to get it right, I think.
Mm.
And even though the graphical splendor of the PS4 and the next one's PS5 and the Xbox X, whatever it's going to be called, I'm sure, you know, but that doesn't really excite me that much. You know, I
No,
thought, yeah, I mean, there's really good graphics around now. How far can they take that? That's what I'm wondering. But that's because that's what they do. Whenever you see a video game on television or even on YouTube, you know, you get one bunged in on whether they want to see it or not. They always say not actual gameplay footage,
oh
because
yeah,
they want
big
you to think
CG.
they want you to think it's a movie, or you're playing it like you're in the world, but you're not. You know, there are limitations on it. Trying to pretend it's anything else is a bit cruel. It's not cruel. It's a bit disingenuous. And I think that like if you had a gameplay, say if you had Streets of Rage before, and you advertising that, you wouldn't have just the running intro. You'd show people how it works because it looks good
Mm.
when it's playing. You
Mm.
know, and I just think, why are they? You know, it just seems to be a whole thing. That the ethos of modern gaming is we're going to make it as near as the real world, whether it's a fantastical future world or fantastical ancient
Yeah.
past. They're still trying to make it as real as they can, but actually you still can't, and you're still trying to pretend you have, rather
Yeah.
than, you know what I mean? It's like, but
There's no hiding poor gameplay with the 2D. You can see straight
no,
away if it's going to be poor. But
yeah,
when they start putting those big CG um,
yeah,
moments in from games and say it's not actual game footage,
yeah.
they're obviously choosing that over the game footage because the game footage is less interesting to watch.
It doesn't inspire you to just think, oh, I want to get that. Well, no,
Yeah,
why don't you show me how it plays? Let's see somebody playing it, or you know,
yeah,
or the computer playing it itself. Anything to show you what it plays like, because
yeah.
as we all know, it's very easy to get sucked into glamorous things, but really, you want the nitty gritty. You want to know what it does.
Mm. You made two very good points there. One of them was the looks of the sprites in 2D. And
Mm,
modern 2D now, they're sort of drawn graphics almost, aren't they?
yeah,
And I know you can draw 3D. There is a very much an art form to that, but the 2D is more. Here's a drawing, and they sort of rendered that drawing and done almost like a cartoon. The motions are moved like Streets of Rage 4, which obviously would have been drawn most likely in a computer program on a pad, and then
yeah,
I've noticed that the 2D games have gone very much in that direction. So it's not just, I mean, you do have a lot of the indie games that try to recapture like 16-bit and 8-bit and
yeah,
32-bit, blah, blah, blah. But modern 2D games, and Streets of Rage 4 is a good example of very specifically those very good looking hand drawn, not just the sprites, but the environments as well.
yeah.
It's just very well done.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I want it to go. I don't, you know, I've seen 16-bit, I've seen 8-bit, you know, and it was good in its time. But what it's like in Street Fighter 4, we've played it a lot, so we've earned all the old characters out in the old games,
Nice.
and it's a bit of fun to play them. But they look crap, you know, compared with the new ones. So in a way, I can't wait to get back to one of the new characters because the old ones are fun to play because you got the nostalgia. But I would have said they should have given you a choice: play the old characters as they looked then, or the old characters how they could have done it now would have been more fun.
Yeah.
But because I say I love the way it looks now. I remember when I first saw like a Street Fighter game in proper, you know, I don't know when it was on PS3 or something like that, and it, you know, they'd obviously really made the effort to keep it looking like the original, but just so much better.
Mm.
Obviously, the animation was. That's the way I've said before many a time. I just want the old-fashioned gameplay and vibe, but with modern graphics, or you know,
Mm.
improved fluidity, improved, you know, definition. You know,
Mm.
I don't want things to look old. I mean, I can. It's a bit like, you know, why would you? It's like having a relic of something relic, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, we can do a game that looks great. No, we're going to make it look like it was made in 1990. Well, no thanks. I don't want that.
Yeah, yeah. There's another point you made earlier, interestingly enough, I'd not thought of before, where you mentioned mobile gaming and a mobile game on there. And I think
Mm.
that might also be a large part of this resurgence of 2D as well, because people are now playing, because you get emulators of more old-fashioned games on your phone, and I think people
Mm.
clocked onto that as well. So now
Yeah.
they're designing all these independent. I suppose for phone gaming, it's not necessarily independent. There's a lot more 2D games
Mm.
that they're moving around, and there's a lot of 2D games that have obviously the vintage stuff that's been ported forwards onto PS4 and very specifically Switch. It seems to be very
Mm.
popular for 2D games, independent or otherwise. But sort of mobile gaming in its essence it feels like that might also. I mean, there's going to be more reasons for something like 2D coming back. I mean, it does. 3D itself feels like it's pushing against a ceiling. And
Mm.
as amazing as the looks in Death Stranding and even Cyberpunk that's coming out that I'm really looking forward to, looks amazing and is obviously the story driven is very much like a film, like you're saying. The gaming industry is bigger than the film industry, especially at the moment, because you can make games remotely. It's harder to make films
Mm.
remotely.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because you can't program human beings, but you can program characters on the game and things. But a lot of the 2D and 2D is actually a very good way of getting into gaming as well. But if you gave a controller to someone who is not used to playing games,
Yeah.
a 3D game where we've probably, even if you've not played many 3D games, you're used to knowing two analog sticks. One will move you forwards, the other one will you're either pointing a gun or you're doing something, expecting various things. When you give that controller to someone, and they're trying to figure out the buttons, they're terrible because it's not become second nature. But as soon as you give them a controller for a 2D game, Mario, for example, or any platformer you like, it's usually just jump or jump and shoot, something very
Yeah.
basic, and then it becomes fun because it's simple enough that they can play it, but the challenge is there. So even if they're dying and they're falling off, they're going, right, I know what I did wrong, I'm going to do it this time, I can do this and get
Yeah.
forwards. But they with a 3D game, if I gave a controller to someone, if I gave a controller to my mum
Mm.
to
Yeah.
play Call of Duty or FIFA or Death Stranding or something like that, Last of Us, whatever new modern game you want, and I gave my mum the controller and said, please, can you,
Would you
just
call FIFA a 3D game?
yeah, yeah. It's it's not a nice situation. There's too much going on,
Yeah.
and that's very much shows that 2D is a very good way of getting into gaming for someone that doesn't game.
Yeah, yeah, definitely go along with that. So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I pressed a button on my microphone and it cut out.
Oh right, yeah. No, it's you said something there, but I forgot what it was now. But
Oh,
no, there's
about 2Ds being a good way of a
yeah,
pathway
yeah, I
into
remember that.
gaming.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. So I definitely think one hand moving something around, the other hand doing the actions is a really good way of doing things. Oh yeah, I was going to say it's a little bit off subject, I suppose, but after when you play 3D games and you have one thing moving you forward and the other one moves where you look, if you like the left hand one. I can never do it if I don't have it reversed on the looking.
Oh,
Pulling
okay,
back,
so you invert the
pulling
control.
back, yeah, yeah. Because if you like, yeah, you have. Because if I want to look up, why would I push forward? That doesn't make sense to me.
You'd
And
pull
if
back
a
forward.
game, if it had a game, sometimes you have to put it reverse. You have to put the invert it,
I think
and I just
just
can't play it.
admitted you've just admitted to being the gaming version of being left-handed.
Must be. But no, I can't see looking up. You pull back because you're looking up. Looking
Yeah,
forward,
yeah,
you push forward. That's
yeah.
how I see the world.
Do you know what,
And it,
interestingly enough, when you do give a controller of a game like that to someone that's never played a game, they're doing exactly what you said. They will pull
yeah,
back to look up.
yeah.
That is quite
To me, the other
interesting.
way that should be the right way. The other way should be the inverted. To me, because I just can't play it the other way. But thank goodness, if almost all 3D games have that inversion. Because I say, would manage otherwise. But so that's not. But yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it's. Yes, I mean, I don't know. When talking about 2D, how do you think is isometric 2D? Because technically it is, but would you call it a 2D game?
Yeah, I mean, Well, it depends on the game, I guess. I mean, something like Viewpoint is it's 2D,
It's a
but it has a
2D
very
game.
much a 3D feel to it, I
Yeah.
suppose. And some of the sprites,
Yes.
the animations are sort of make them 3D because they're moving around in certain
Yeah.
ways, and not just in one or two directions. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's which
I
makes
was
that a
think,
different challenge altogether. I suppose people might have found that difficult at the time because you're used to very much a 2D flat, and when you've got it
yeah.
isometric, it is completely different feel.
Yeah, but I always found it very easy to move from straight 2D or flat to isometric because it wasn't that different. But you just it's like was it Sonic 3D? Remember we were talking about that the other day,
Yeah, yeah.
which is isometric, but it's very much a sort of 2D type of game. It's just
Mm,
got that slightly extra dimension, which I quite enjoy. Yeah, I suppose it's 2.5D. I suppose you could call it.
yeah, yeah.
But no, yeah, I mean, I like that as well. I've always found isometric games to be good, usually good fun.
Mm.
It's the ones that I've played, I've liked.
I'm trying to
But
get a
yeah,
video without mentioning Shock Troopers.
Shock Troopers, yeah. Well, I'd say that's more 2D than isometric, isn't it?
It
Really,
is, it
even though
is,
you can
yeah.
go in different ways, the way they move and everything. I love the period movement, and the way they. It's like weird, isn't it, when they're going
Yeah.
sideways and again.
Oh,
But
especially when they're
it's
strafing, yeah, they're sort
yeah.
of.
But yeah, it's like in a lot of those 2D games, especially on Neo Geo, which is common ground, I suppose. They often have things that like are 3D, like a Metal Slug you shoot, and suddenly this
Mm.
bloke will come towards you on the screen, like so it's been shot, just like and it's just that sort of thing is fun, and the way they tried to scale it so it looks 3D, it's quite it was a bit of
Mm.
fun. It was more fun than it was nothing to do with the game. It was just it was a bit of extra, if you like, rather than
Yeah.
the fundamentals of the gameplay. It was something you could do, which was a bit different.
Mm.
Although I did find that confusing. You know, sometimes you get a game, and there was one game I was playing. I think which one it is now, but most of it, suddenly you're on a motorbike. Which game is that? There's one where suddenly which one is it? But you're like, it's a bit like Contra or something, and then suddenly you're on a motorbike, you're whizzing across the screen, and things are coming from usually either from left or right or into the screen from behind, and that's again 2.5D. But I always found that a bit confusing because the rest of the game isn't like that. And you're thinking, yeah, I suppose I can see it, but it almost, I suppose it's taking it away from the little limited, real, like I was saying, even maybe 2D, but you're still drawn into its 2D-ness world, if you like,
Mm.
And
It's breaking that
if
wall.
you suddenly go somewhere a bit weird, then it kind of, I suppose, I've never had it, but at King of Fighters game, it's just got a shoot 'em up stage. I mean, I
Mm.
just think that's just like a bit ludicrous, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
I
mean, it's a
really
bit of
want that King
fun,
of Fighters
but yeah,
shooting game.
yeah, it'll be
Just to
fun.
try it.
But after I remember I used to see games. Well, I really won that game, but I didn't have the console or it was on. There was one called it was a 2D shoot 'em up. I think it's like King of the It's called King Monkey. It's like a little monkey going along on a cloud and he shoots stuff. It's called King Monkey or something like that. It was originally on one of the Nintendo. It was on the Cube or the one after the Cube or Wii or something like that. But I never managed to get hold of it. But then I saw it's available on the PS4 now. But when I watched the video of it, it's poor.
Mm.
Because for me, the sound effects on a shoot 'em, as we've said before, on a shoot 'em up have got to be good.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
sort of like feeble little movement, they just don't get to it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I think, as you said, on 2D, you've got to have. Yeah, I suppose it depends on the type of game you're playing. If you're playing a sort of comical platform game, you don't have to have realistic or powerful sound effects. But if you're doing one which relies on gunpowder or
Mm.
firepower, then having a firepower just sounds like pew pew pew. It's like,
Yeah.
how can you say that seriously? It's got
Yeah.
to. I mean, it can be comical, like Metal Slug, where you've got, like people, like the fire. it's pretty cruel, really. We've got that flamethrower, and they
Oh.
go around on fire. It's quite cruel, but it's funny as well. I
Do you
think,
know what? That kind of comedy doesn't translate to 3D in the same way. So
no,
if you're talking about in-gameplay comedy, when they're trying to do a visual thing, it's
yeah,
very rare that that works Whereas in 2D, stuff like that is always funny and it's very
Yeah,
recognizable. And
I think
a lot of the time in 3D, it has to cut to a CG thing for it to be like a movie to
yeah,
be funny.
yeah, that's true actually. I think the only time I found it worked, there was a game, I think it was called Metal Arms, and it was like a little, it was
Oh,
a
that
3D like, no, it was a 3D adventure shoot 'em up type of game, and I think you were like a smallish robot, and it's all a
metal.
robotic world. But anyway, I remember you used to have this brilliant weapon. You'd fire a weapon on something, it'd attach itself and ding like a oh.
Yes, sorry, keep going. I was going to search Metal Arms.
Yeah, that's the baby. You know, this weapon, you'd fire it, and it'd hit the poor robot enemy, and then they'd run around, go, and suddenly, 5 seconds later, boom, it blew up. They shoot off into like nuts and bolts and things. But that was
Brilliant.
funny. But yeah, that was one of the best bits of it. Watching them hear about. It was a bit cruel, but it was funny because they're robots, so it wasn't like some person that was just going to have their legs blown off or anything. But I suppose robots have feelings too. Comedy violence could work quite well because let's face it, a lot of games have violent aspects to them, don't they? Apart from like puzzle games. I remember I used to have a handheld console called the Atari Lynx. It was around about the same time as the Jaguar. That's hence the cat name. And it had a game called Crystal Mines 2, which I probably gave off the PC. I don't know. But it was just a puzzle game where you were these mines, a 2D version of a mine, and you had like a little robotic miner, but you could dig through certain, and there'd be like these little like monsters and other things, explosive things you had to avoid, and you just basically you had to collect all the crystals on that level, and then you go up to the next level. But there was dangers, like say there was demonic munching things, a bit like Pac-Man, but more detail, and like certain things, if you tried to get through them, they'd blow up. And it was a really good game. I wasn't that big into puzzle games at the time. I thought I'd give it a go, because the Lynx, bit like Jaguar, was fairly limited in what you could get for it. But no, it was really probably one of my favourite of that type of game I've ever played. I often wondered why they haven't reproduced it on something. I was looking at a video of it this morning, just reminding myself, thinking, oh yeah, it was good fun. It was fairly nice graphics, but it was very simple. But it really worked well. But yeah, very much a 2D sort of a thing.
I suppose another thing would be fighting games and one-on-one beat-em-up type games very much return to that sort of 2D realm in terms of mechanics. I know they're sort of 2.5D, but the reason why they've returned to that is that it's so much stronger in gameplay than it is when you've got a 3D environment. So those big arena fighters that we've talked previously in the last sort of beat-em-up discussion that we had, they do work, but they're not as tight in terms of gameplay and the environments that you can destroy and things that happen. It can be a little bit more janky, whereas when you've got that sort of 2D, 2.5D space, you can only really go backwards, forwards, jump up and down, and maybe shuffle sideways slightly.
Yeah,
but it still remains in that sort of.
It remains on the timing and type of attack or defense that you choose to adopt.
Yeah.
Again, that works into when I originally started. I was saying it's the limitations of the 2D which make the gameplay work well, and that's exactly the same situation there. You're limited because you just got like a screen size, usually a screen size environment. You back, forward, jump, and it's all down to timing and doing little clever maneuvers to pull off your specials and things like that, and defending, obviously, or shielding or whatever they call it. But I think that is a totally simplistic 2D type of game which totally dominated the games world for quite a few years, really. It was like the number one.
Talking about game mechanics, 2D game mechanics, it's very rare they're not tight. With a lot of modern 3D games, you can press a button and your character's doing movements and things with the way that you're moving and pressing the button, but it doesn't feel, it's not exact. So you're not pressing left and attack, unless it's something like Dark Souls. But it's almost like you're pressing it and then the animation's reacting and then you're learning the animation and pressing it. I know you sort of are with 2D as well.
Yeah.
But with 2D, it's almost instant. You know that if I press that, it's gonna, or if I press that, it's going to jump.
Yeah.
Whereas in 3D, you do have that, but there's a sort of animation delay sometimes, and something I can't think of anything. Games of that sort of ilk that I'm thinking of, they're more like third person, Shadow of Mordor or Assassin's Creed and things like that, where someone's gone to hit you and you have a bit of time to press a button and grab it, and then you press another button and you sort of stab them in the neck or something.
Yeah.
You don't have that so much with 2D. It's more very straight, very what's
Yeah.
the latency between pressing the button and the action. There is
Yeah.
none.
Well,
Will be some,
exactly.
but it's yeah.
To me, that's what makes it good. The fact that
Mm.
you feel like you are operating that person, or there is a connection between you and that person, even if it's 2D, Japanese girl dressed in a strange costume. You still feel connected to that character because everything you do,
It's
they
immediate.
react straight
Yeah.
away, and so you're drawn in that way. It's like a connect. I suppose a bit like a car that responds really well to your steering.
Mm.
Like they always going on. They used to go on about Top Gear. Like a sort of a really good feel to it drives. I suppose that's a good 2D games, and then in which case it's most of them these days. They do react well to what you're doing. And obviously, but no, I hate that sort of. Again, you feel like you're suffering because you want this environment that looks like a film in 3D. Not always, but with the 2D, they haven't got to think about that. They're not trying to look like a film. They're trying to look like a game, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there is something in that. And yes, there was a lot of nostalgia, I suppose. Lots of people like all my early gaming was 2D, and even though I can remember 3D coming out and being interested by it, I can remember there's a game on the Sega Saturn called Bug. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I've got
It was like a little green bug, and it's like sort of 3D, but in a limited walking along.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the time, it just seemed, it just looked good, and but it did get tedious quite quickly. It had some comical. You come out with some comical comments.
Bug juice.
But it was just trying to think of a 2D game which had some appeal to it.
I think I picked that up
Toe
from Blockbuster.
Yeah, it was a very early Saturn game, but it had a sort of quite a good 3D look to it.
Mm.
But going back to 2D, I was thinking, have you ever heard of a game called Toe Jam and Earl?
No, I haven't.
It was a Mega Drive game. It was they're two sort of funkadelic, sort of hippie type, sort of pot smoking funkadelic blokes.
No,
They're aliens. Actually, they're aliens, and they wander around this world. It's a 2D world, but there's places to wander and go and do stuff. And I can't remember exactly how you achieved things. I know you wandered around and you collected stuff.
What was it called?
Toe Jam and Earl.
Toe Jam. Oh, there you go.
And Earl. Mega Drive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's some good music too. They did a sequel and it just wasn't anywhere near as good. The graphics were much better in the sequel, but the first one was much better. It was, but that's the two main characters. And one looks a bit squiddy-like, and I don't know what the other one's supposed to be, a sea slug or something. But yeah, they were again. It had this sort of funky music background, and there were a couple of cool dudes. It was good, very enjoyable. But yeah, that's something that you can look up. But I don't think they've ever done. I think they might have tried to do that one. So they did. They brought out a sequel. I think it was on like the Xbox, the original, or something like that. But no, it just didn't play anywhere near as well. It looked prettier, and it was a bit more 3D looking, but no, it lacked the originals. Didn't draw you in like the original did.
Mm.
But yeah, it was good.
There's 2D characters and sprites, etc. They always usually a lot more personality to them as well. I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, you get that with 3D as well. I mean, I can point out something like Borderlands, where it works when it's very wacky and they're not trying to be realistic. They're trying to be silly. But when you're looking at games where they're trying to be realistic, Call of Duty, when you're trying to look at games, the Division 2 is one that we've played recently, which is a good game, but the characters are just, you can create your own characters and make them really silly, which is great. But the point I'm getting at is a lot of those games that come out, and even stuff like The Last of Us and You can name any of those sort of games where they look like human beings,
Yeah.
but there's no the driven side of it is always from the story, the character itself to look at. If you took a box art, box cover of any of those games, The Division, it's just a plain old soldier with a gun, or
Mm.
Last of Us is a guy holding a girl's hand. It's like you can get
I've seen Last of Us.
it's imagery,
Yeah.
but it's not quite the same as when you see wacky 2D character and stuff. And
Yeah.
even like example, that being a good example of a box of 2D characters where you would never get that in a 3D game. It's so rare as something, I mean, unless it was like SpongeBob SquarePants, the game or
Yeah.
something. But it's very rare where you would get anything. It doesn't translate quite as well into 3D. The further along the spectrum to wacky you get, it just
Yeah.
doesn't quite work.
No, I think you're right. And that's the magic. I suppose it's the particularly with Japanese games, they do tend to they manage to get that sense of fun, humour. Oh, they just put in everything. It could be anything from like totally crazy to very amusing or quite sort of cool, or in some ways quite sexy. I suppose some of the female characters they put in, or male characters if you're other way inclined, is they're sort of they've got everything in there, haven't they? But as you say, if you're going for realism, if you're trying to make it a film, then it's different.
It's funny.
If you're just saying,
I was just thinking a lot of the characters in games that are 3D. I mean, I'm sort of thinking along the lines of Super Smash Brothers. Super Smash Brothers, a lot of their characters are based from old 2D games, and they've translated them into sort of 3D. So Smash Brothers is a 2D environment. It still is a platform, and you've got 3D characters moving around, and you can essentially a 2D environment. That translates really well. The other thing I can think of that translates well character-wise into 3D is actual anime characters into games. I mentioned Jump Force and another game. They all stand out independently. These are well-introduced characters from different animes, 2D animes, and now you stuck them in a 3D environment. But because it's anime-looking down to a T, it works. It's not, you've already bought into that. It's an anime game. I'm playing as Goku, or I'm playing as Vegeta, I'm playing as One Punch Man, or whoever you want to be, Akira, etc. Well, I don't think there's an Akira one, but that
I know what you're
does
talking
translate.
about.
That it does translate a lot better. Whereas generic characters, certainly from, I mean, even using Call of Duty as an example, the Modern Warfare, the original one that came out, the character that's still popular today is he had a couple of normal soldiers with him, but he had this very long, big beard and mustache in a very particular, it kind of looked like Lemmy, very particular design, and that stands out because they made him a very particular character, and he had a very Cockney voice. I think they used one of the actors from EastEnders at the time, but he that stands out. But it's very rare. They had a character in a later game who was Scottish, but he just had very boring looking, like either me or just any generic person, which is the point. They're trying to be realistic. But characters in that sense don't stand out quite as well as something from Super Smash Brothers with a background in 2D, or Jump Force or Dragon Ball Z, where they got that background in 2D and now it's been thrown into 3D, works really well. Like we're saying with the wacky stuff, Ratchet and Clank, stuff like that, where it's become 3D, very cartoony, does work.
Yeah, it can do. But I think with 2D, you can't have bland characters because how would you differentiate one from the other? And two, how would you feel drawn towards them? The whole idea with a limited sort of palette or a limited cast is you've got to be able to, you got to have a choice for which one you play, and you've got to feel a little bit invested in them. That you like that character and you want that character to overcome the problems to a certain extent. But as I've said before, so a lot of these comments are not 100%. Not saying no 3D games got any of this. Of course they have. I'm not saying games have gone apart. That 3D is the future in lots of ways. But there is a place for 2D, and it's still my preferred sort of look, really. I do quite like the isometric, and I have enjoyed a lot of the, particularly the sort of wander around shooting everything in sight 3D games. Can be quite fun. Probably Earth Defense Force 3,
Yeah.
4, and 5, or whatever, would be my one of the games I played more than anything over the last 5 years. So, and that's a good 3D game. Again, it's very much drawn from the 2D. You still like you kill something, it drops a box,
Yeah.
and you run through it to pick it up, which is straight off of 2D games. But it sort of works because you immediately know, oh, there's a box over there. It's white with a red cross on it. I wonder if that will help my health. And yes, oh, look, it's got a picture of a machine gun on it. Let's go over and see what happens there. It doesn't take much to work it out.
A lot of those fundamentals of gaming that you see in modern games now do stem from the original 3D games. Leveling up.
2D, you mean?
No, yeah, 2D games. Like you were saying, you're picking things up. Even in sort of RPGs and things, you're upgrading certain things. You're collecting coins or you're collecting something. There's always something. You can tell that they're very much the foundations were laid for 2D, and the 3D is just an extension of that. But I mean, we've mentioned a lot of 2D games in the past, and even now, I think on my favorite list of all time, I've got 2D games on there as well. And I don't think it's necessarily an age thing as well, because you see younger people playing 2D games again. Like we were saying, there's been a resurgence. And some of those games just they hold up. Something, especially Metal Slug and Streets of Rage, and Tetris, all those sort of big, massive classic games, they hold up. You can play them now, and people enjoy them, and they don't care that they're 2D or 3D. It's just that the game is good.
Yeah, I think the only genre of gaming which I would have preferred 3D when I was younger, and then even now, I think is racing games, car racing games, because I think when I can remember back in the day, say 16-bit, there was it called Micro Machines, was very popular.
Yeah.
It was like, but I just thought, why would you want to play that? Yeah, top down. And I thought, it's like it whizzed across the screen in no time at all. And I said, why would you want to play that? And when you got Sega Rally or on all the umpteen Need for Speed and all that sort of thing. But then I got a game on the Neo Geo called Neo Drift Out, which is there were two games that came out. The other one was called now Overtop was the other one, but that wasn't quite as good. But Neo Drift Out was done by, I think it's done by Visco, which were did a lot of Neo Geo games, but they didn't do wonderful graphics. Like they didn't where the Neo SNK games and some of the other ones were really pushing the envelope graphically. Visco just tended to concentrate on good gameplay and simplistic-y sort of graphics. Anyway, they brought us Neo Drift Out, which was sort of top down, although it's again very slightly isometric, but basically top down with a slight isometric.
Basically, one with like an Impreza and a Celica and
but there's one. The other one's Overtop, which came out at the same time, within a month or two. I think Neo Drift Out came out a couple of months before. But Overtop looked nice, but it wasn't anywhere near as good as Neo Drift Out. But it really played well. Basically, you'd you'd whiz along and you just get a little arrow telling you there's a big turn to the left or a big turn to the right or a snake thing going on.
Yeah.
Because you had to react really quickly, because it didn't take long for the car to get from the bottom left-hand side to the top right-hand, and then there was a little short.
Terrible at those top-down driving games.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I always thought, I remember seeing Mike Streams and playing a couple of games. I thought, it's just I can't get it. I don't get it at all. But yeah, Neo Drift Out was really good. I really enjoyed it. And it was a little shortcut. There'd be like a little road with some oil drums across it. You just wham through them, and you cut off a big corner. It was just nice. It was simplistic, but it had jumps and things to avoid. But yeah, it was a good little. If you ever fancy a top-down-ish sort of racing game, Neo Drift Out. I don't think it's been put onto the modern machines. Unfortunately, it might be on your Neo cartridge that you've got.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I might have played it. The only one that I can think of top-down that I was any good at on the Super Nintendo was the Biker Mice game, which actually had really tight mechanics. It was a pretty good game. I was always rubbish at those. I think you're right. I think racing games work very well for 3D because
it is.
They just do. I mean, Mario Kart was 2D, wasn't it? It's the first Mario Kart was 2D.
I can't remember it that well. I wasn't into the early Nintendo games. I didn't have an early Nintendo console. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, if you're in a car, that's quite a good way for a game because you're seeing it like through a screen. Because you look, your car screen, windscreen is a screen, and which you don't actually look at all of it most of the time anyway. But so really, it's ideal, and you've got limited track. There's no point having a race in an open field. It's got to have a track, and it's like you're following it. So it all lends itself to gameplay, to video gameplay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think racing game wise, yeah, you can't beat a 3D really. 2D can't keep up with it. But
no, you're right.
If you did want one, I'd recommend Neo Drift Out. But
Nice.
I got a lot of play out of that one. It's one of those ones you have to get to a certain point before the timer ran out and things like that. But it was just good. But yeah, it's like initially when you start, you're just flying off and going fast too quickly, and but then you just learn. I usually find with racing games, especially that help, never use the brake. It's all done on acceleration.
Yeah.
I often find because once you start braking, you start to lose control, or it's too last minute. And things like that. It's all better to do it on acceleration. Same with Sega Rally and 3D. I often found hardly ever touch the brakes. And would occasionally, but mostly do it on accelerator. But it's a good way of saving fuel as well, because every time you touch a brake, you're wasting fuel. In real life, that is.
yeah.
You're not in a game, obviously. And I was glad that was a game, limited amount of fuel. Oh shit, you run out, Yeah, you kept using the brake too much.
I bet it'll get there at some point because you do have sort of driving simulator type games. I've played them and I have enjoyed them, but I've never enjoyed them as much as arcade driving games. They're always much more fun.
Definitely,
because it's more about the challenge and whizzing around than it is how specific you are about when you're braking and when you're turning. And
Nintendo brought out like a 3D thing quite early on, didn't they? It was like I think you had to sort of put your head up to like a goggle. Nintendo, it was a game console, but it never took off.
Battle Zone, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, it might be it. Yeah, that's the baby. Yeah, you'd shoot tanks and those little pyramid things. But I don't know when that came out, but I reckon it was. But it all seemed very clever at the time.
Like 1980.
1980. Yeah, they're very. I remember thinking about it. That's quite impressive for 1980.
That is actually.
Yeah, I think when you got like the old 8-bit 2D and some of the 16-bit, they're so sort of blocky and pixelated. It's hard to enjoy looking at them.
Yeah.
It was, once like the Neo came along and consoles that could do it with more fluidity and look a lot better. Same with 3D, like the early 3D stuff, it always looked really blocky and.
I mean, to be perfectly frank, now we played Neo Geo games when I was younger. I wouldn't have noticed that much anyway. Playing them now, and then going and playing a Mega Drive game or a SNES game, there's no competition. You're like, it's just not as good looking as Metal Slug or Stormtroopers or Street Hoop or something.
The Neo was a more plus. It had huge cartridges. The cartridges you've seen, the cartridges of the Neo Geo. Compared with the Mega Drive is humongous, as is the memory.
Yeah.
So yes, that's why it looked so good, and why it was. It's hard to imagine it now, but that was the state of the art console at one time. Now it's a sort of highly collectible console. And that's how that. But I think there's a lot of classic 2D games out there. I can imagine if you're a collector, there must be more and more people collecting games, from the past. I don't go to these events, but there are a lot of gaming fairs. And, they must sell a lot of stuff there, and there must be people collecting. But often you'll have a software company, especially back in the day. I probably still do now. I don't know, but you'd have a software company you particularly liked, and you'd look for their stuff. It wasn't always good, but I always quote Treasure. There's a lot of people that like Treasure, and there was.
They're still going strong, Treasure.
Yeah, but you don't hear them as. There was at one time they were thought of being really out there as one of the best with games like Gunstar Heroes, Guardian Heroes, and then later Radiant Silver Gun and that, and Ikaruga a bit less, but a bit further on. But those they're just they was pushed. They took a simple sort of 2D idea and just added little bits,
Mm.
little ideas which nobody else had really done before. They had nobody taken any notice, but they did it and it worked. You know?
Mm. I
But yeah,
suppose the overall thing that makes 2D stand out for me specifically is that charm and tight gameplay mechanics. Not
yeah,
every game, but compared to a lot of 3D, 2D games are very tight mechanic wise. And they definitely have a charm about them. There's a reason why fighting games sort of rely heavily on that sort of 2D feel, still that sort of 2.5D. Um, Definitely sort of reason why that people play 2D games still is because they're easy to get into. They're not usually very long to play unless, like you're saying, it's a sort of a JRPG or something like that, or sort of an advanced tactics game. Um, it definitely has a something that 3D doesn't have all of its own.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was well capable of creating atmospheric situations, graphically lovely situations, all the things that 3D does now or can do now. It was capable of doing it within its genre and its time. You know,
Mm,
lots of 2D games are just like sort of enthralled by the sort of loveliness of the overall feel of it through the
mm,
quality of the graphics, obviously the gameplay, music, and yes, I think a lot of that was. It's 3D is a natural way to go on, but
there's
I don't
still a
know. Even,
place.
yeah, I mean, there's still a place for 2D, and well, I think there always will be because you are on a 2D screen, aren't you?
Mm,
And it's I suppose it's a classic. You know, chess is a game that's thousands of years old. I guess that's still playing. You know,
mm.
and I was thinking about it the other day. I wonder who invented it. Anyway, I'm sure there's.
Yeah,
I mean, I would think about it. There's like billions of alternative moves on a chess piece. I suppose that but that's the idea of anything with a good video game. There's always room for something else,
mm,
something just a little progression or a little evolution in it. And a genre can really take it on.
yeah.
Which is I think is what they're thinking about. I'm not saying this isn't again. This isn't a strict rule, but I think 2D games they did evolve, over time. But with 3D games, they tend to evolve graphically
Mm,
more than gameplay wise. That might be one of the reasons why 2D is popular. I think they really did perfect things
mm,
and also evolve things quite a lot because they had to really. They
yeah.
couldn't go into a different dimension very easily. So let's work within the 2 dimensions or 2.5 dimensions that we've got and make it good.
There's
But yeah,
there's a lot of uh, traditional sort of 3D gaming convention that they all rely on, and certainly, I mean, it's evolved now. Don't have one near me, do I? It's evolved now where a controller could be PlayStation or Xbox, but it's evolved to a point in a controller where a lot of games now, you know that this button's going to do this button's going to do this.
yeah,
One's going to be movement, one's going to be aim, even if it's a 2D twin stick shooter or a 3D twin stick shooter. One's
yeah,
moving and one's aim. The triggers are usually shoot or bombs or secondary
yeah,
weapon. There's not many games that move 3D games that move away from that. And I got to stop quoting it. The only one I can think of is Death Stranding. The only thing in Death Stranding that the triggers do most of the time is grab yourself so you don't fall over. That was really strange getting used to. Some wacky Japanese type things in there. But I mean, it's most games are very generic in the sense that you could stick not even Call of Duty, a next first person shooter on. You will know the controls already if you've played one before. Same with
mm,
third person. It's very rare now. I remember Sega Saturn, any of the old consoles, you can point at any of those old consoles, you could pick a similar type game, whether it's perhaps less so with platformy, but it could be an action type game, and you press the A button or the B button. It's not going to be the same as it is on another game of the same type, because for some reason they've decided to map the controls completely differently. You used to
yeah,
get that all the time with the older consoles, didn't you? It's apart from
yeah,
some of the arcadey ones. Whereas now you kind of know what you're getting with games. It's sort of made the controls generic, which is good in a way because you're thinking about it less.
Yeah, sure.
But a lot of those,
Well, a lot of them you can choose what does what, can't you?
yeah, and you can
Lots of games.
remap stuff now as well, however you want. Like you're saying, the inversion. You've got a lot of control now over the controls and whether you want the brightness up, and there is all of that
Yeah.
that you don't have in most 2D games, or certainly older 2D games. But then you
Kind of
don't
thinking,
necessarily want that with the older ones.
well, I'm sure they programmed it to be the right brightness and the right contrast. Why would
Yeah.
you want to fanny around with it?
Yeah,
But,
well, I know people who does that. He turns the brightness up. You know, when it says, make sure you can't see this part, and you go into a dark place, I can't see anything. It's like, I can see fine. It's because you've taught yourself that everything has to be bright. It's like, you
yeah.
don't take a photograph and edit it for everything to be extremely, well, unless you're into HDR, make everything really bright. It's just not really, you know, you need
No.
that. It's there for atmosphere. You take the atmosphere away, you're right.
Sure.
It's programmed specifically for those things. It's, anyway, we're getting off. Or I'm taking off topic there, but
yeah, I suppose that's a way that again, when different consoles developed, more options came. And besides, choosing to change the controller buttons was this fairly early thing, really, but it's just got more and more as you've gone on. But again, perhaps again, it's like too many options aren't always the best thing. You know, as I was saying, it's a bit like having these films where you can choose a different ending. Well, I don't want to choose the ending of a film. I didn't make the bloody thing. You know, somebody else made the film. If they can't get the ending right, then what's the point? You know, yeah, it's just sorry, you can have it with an alternative ending. I don't want it with an alternative ending. It's just like, you know, oh look, oh no, Frodo didn't drop the ring in the thing, and now Dark Lord rules the universe. Well, what's the point in that? I didn't, you know, it's just, but it's.
Mind you, that is in gaming as well. A lot in fighting games as well. You know, when they have like a very basic storyline in fighting games.
Yeah.
And usually when they've made a sequel, King of Fighters and Street Fighter do it a lot. They know who's won the tournament or the whatever they're fighting in. They know who's won. So it'll be officially Ryu, or it'll be Terry, or not so much Terry, I suppose, Kyo Kusanagi, whatever his name is. You know that they've won that one. You're thinking, then why have you stuck all these really cool endings? They've obviously done it so you play through the character. It's like, but if you've got a favorite character that's one of the less important, is not really in the main storyline, and they've got Tekken did that a lot. You play through. It's part of the fun of fighting games is playing through their little individual stories and completing it and unlock things. Well, it's less unlocking now, more buying things, but that was always part of the charm. But I always remember when I was younger being really frustrated that, hold on a minute, I love this character and their ending. I've done all the endings, but this character is my favorite. But all of a sudden you've decided that this person just won the tournament, and in the next game you cut out one of the best characters.
Yeah, that's another thing I don't like it. I say in games when you have to buy extras. I didn't mind on Earth Defense Force, like when they brought that out, you could buy extra mission packs. Yeah, that's good. You know, you've got, instead of having like 80 levels or whatever it is, you actually you can buy another 20 levels. It's in a different part of the world. Yeah, I can do that, but I don't want to. We can have this one, but in a different color, or this one's got a little bit extra firepower, or I don't. You know, you should earn that through winning things. Not it's just a financial thing, isn't it? But no, I'm not into that.
That snuck in from mobile gaming and free-to-play mobile games. And would you like to pay money to not have to work and grind to level up and get all these? I hate that. I really hate that, and I really hate what mobile gaming has done to the gaming industry. But you're right. I mean, that's what I miss from games. Is part of the joy of playing through a game is to unlock stuff. I want to unlock all of the hidden characters. I don't want to have to pay £5 or £3 for another character down the line. It's like, why? They're one of the main characters. They should be in the fucking game. But
I agree.
It is annoying. It's really annoying.
Yeah, but then when you've got them all, it's a bit disappointing now, isn't it? It's like the Streets of Rage 4. Because it has, when you score, it goes along this line. There's a little triangle, a little diamond, where the next bonus comes. But we've done them all now, so there's no line. It's just you get more points. So we've won all the extra characters from Street Race 1, Street Race 2, Street Race 3. So it's like, well, what's the point of getting points?
Mm.
But I say, oh, if I need to win another level, that'd be good. What they used to get in the older 2D games, you got something like a gallery. Oh, now you can see all the pre-drawings. Oh, that's vaguely in. But no, there's a lot of extras. You just think, no, why don't you just concentrate on the game?
That's something I'm not into. Like, if I want to look at the artwork, I might buy an art book.
Yeah,
but
indeed,
I don't really do.
So yeah, I think we've sort of pretty much covered it on the 2D front. I thought you were going to ask me what are your five favourite 2D games, but I honestly couldn't say because there's so much choice.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Like, share, and subscribe. Please feel free to leave comments below for myself or Graham, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye bye.